Okay, so today I'm going to work on having an Xbox controller that will change the position of the robot arm in Unity and also on the physical arm itself. So I've just moved the arm to behind me. You might be able to hear it moving around as I control it from Unity. But you can see the position in Unity to know where it is in the physical world. And what I want to do is take the input from the Xbox controller and apply it to each one of these different elements of the robot arm. So yesterday I wrote this script arm servo, which allows me to modify different elements of the arm hierarchy based on this displacement option. Oops, it's not running, so it's not moving, but if I run the script, then you'll see that it updates as I update the displacement. So each element has the same script with slightly different settings, and the displacement modifies the element of the hand that it's pointed to. So this one rotates the claw, which is lower down in the hierarchy for it. So I can come and modify my position, and all of the elements of the arm below it will modify correctly. So what I want to do is read the input from the Xbox controller, read one input at a time for each input that I want to map to the position of the servo, and I want each different input to affect a different element of the hand, so one of these to point to a different script. The way that you get input from the servo controller, I just started by doing a search for Xbox controller support, and this page is quite helpful in telling you how to set it up. The main thing to do is that you have to go into Unity input setup and add all of the different components of the Xbox controller that you want to be able to read the value of. So this page has some information about how to do that. And then within the code has a bit of example code for moving a character. We don't want to move a character, but the important part of the code is just this, which is input get access and then the name of the input that you've set up. What that does is read the value of your different elements of your Xbox controller. So this is pretty much the main bit of what we're doing. We're reading a value, we're reading a particular input, so in this case left joystick X, which is this one here, and we are applying that to an element in a Unity scene. And what we want to do is apply these inputs to the displacement value of each one of these different scripts. So I've already set up, if we go to project settings and input, I've already set up a few of the different Xbox inputs that I want to be able to read for changing the position of things on my arms. So there's certain buttons and certain joysticks that I want to control certain elements of the arm. Let's start with the triggers. I'll start with the left joystick controller actually, because that's the most straightforward. We can find out what the settings for each element of the Xbox controller are by going to the Unity wiki. It has a page on the Xbox 360 controller, and it just tells us here, for example, okay, the left stick x-axis is just considered you just plug it in as the x-axis. So if we come here, we can see the left joystick, we just under axis we just set it to x-axis. If we want to plug in the triggers, which is what I'm going to use for affecting the claw, we just set it to axis 3. And for axis 3, the left trigger gives a value of -1, and the right trigger gives a value of 1. So I have already set this up under triggers. You can add more elements to your list just by changing this number. So if I set the number of inputs to 25, then it will copy the last element and add another one down to the bottom. I can set this to 200, or I'll set it to 100, and you'll just see that it's copied that last one a bunch of times. And then you can rename them and set them up as you wish. I'll just set it back to 22 because I haven't got that many inputs at the moment. You'll see I've set up triggers. You can name them whatever you want, but it makes sense to name it something that makes sense. So I have an input on the Xbox controller, joystick 1, that's the third axis, which corresponds to the triggers on the controller. Okay, so I have that input set up for the Xbox controller, all of the things that I want to set up, so the A button if I wanted to use it, all of the different things I'd have to add to the input controller and configure correctly and name however I wanted. The next thing that I've done is just written a very simple script called input controller. I've made a new game, empty game object, added the input controller script to it, and this is super basic. All it does is allow you to map a particular named input to a particular point, a particular part of the servo arm, and then also set a sensitivity. So this thing is maybe a little bit intimidating. It's just a nice way of allowing you to set up this nice input scheme in the inspector. So this bit here is just a way of saying, okay, I have a type of object which is called input mapping. Input mapping consists of a string, which is whatever name you want to give it, a particular servo arm component, and a float, like a fractional number, which is the sensitivity value. And then I want to say, okay, my inputs are any number of sets of input mapping. So I can say, okay, I want to map 5 different inputs to 5 different servo arms, and just this little bit here is what allows you to do that. So I'm just saying, okay, allow through the inspector to set up an array, a list of these objects. So this bit is just a nice way of making it clear and easy to use in the inspector, but the actual code is really basic. For every single mapping that you've set up, so for each, goes through each mapping that you've set up in this array, and it goes, okay, read that input, apply the sensitivity value for it. So let's say we want it to only affect the servo displacement a little bit, then we make the sensitivity very low, and then so for each input we apply sensitivity, and then we apply that value to the displacement of whatever our target servo arm is. So we can have a look at that, how it's set up at the moment. Here is our first one for doing the claw, and we say, okay, our input name, which is the name of the input that we've set up here, triggers. So we want to take that name, and we want to tell this script that that's the name of the input, which corresponds to this. And then we want to say, okay, we want that input to affect this arm servo component, and we want it, because the arm servo is a number between 0 and 0.54, this is the distance between the elements of the claw. I don't want it to jump from 0 to 1 immediately as soon as I press the button, because that's going to be outside the bounds of where the servo can move to. So I want to apply a sensitivity which is very low, which means it will move slowly. So if I run this now, and I use my triggers, you'll see that it's not moving too fast. If I put it all the way down, then it's going to be applying, if I put, for example, if I put the right trigger down all the way, then every time the script updates, it's going to be getting a number of +1 to for the value of this input, and then it's going to reduce it down. It's going to multiply it by this sensitivity number, so 0.02, and then it's going to apply that value to the displacement of the claw, which is why it doesn't jump super fast between a completely open and a completely closed position. So let's try that again. There we go. So using this input script, I can set up all of the inputs that I want for the Xbox controller to apply to the robot arm. And I've got a few notes about which inputs I want to affect different parts of the robot arm. And okay, so I already have the triggers for the claw, that's good. Now I want the rotation of the claw, which I'm considering the hand, to be changed by this right hand joystick, the Y axis. So I've already set up in my inputs, I've set up right joystick X, and I've configured it to axis 4 because I've looked in the wiki and seen that the right joystick X-axis is considered axis 4, so that's where I got that number from. The sensitivity is just set to 1, that's fine. And now I have that input, which is that left and right control, applying to the hand. So just pull it across with a sensitivity of 1, and if I run it now, then you can see that I can rotate the hand using the X and Y of the Xbox controller. And I can use the same control as I was using before to open and close it using the triggers. Okay, the next one that I wanted to do was the angle, what I called the wrist angle, which is moving it up and down, and I wanted that to be the Y-axis of this joystick. So I have to check that I have, first thing I'll do is check what the Y-axis is called. So this right joystick, the up and down, the Y-axis is called axis 5. Just go into Unity, just stop it. Go into Unity, input, and make sure that I've set this up properly. Right joystick Y, axis 5, so that's correct. Just cut and paste that input name into my controller, and yeah, make sure it's the wrist. And now let's run it again. You can see that I can change the angle with the up and down, the rotation with the left and right, and the position of the claw using the triggers. So ideally I want to set up all these inputs so that I can do some fairly complicated movement of the arm with my two thumbs, and also be able to open and close. So I want to be able to reach down and pick something up really without having to stop with one joystick and then move on to a different control, for example the D-pad. I want it to be as easy as possible. So what I'm going to probably try and do is use the D-pad for the very rough positioning, so the rotation of the whole arm at the base, and also the angle of the entire arm at the base, and then use these ones for much finer control, so that I can just sort of reach down and pick something up using my left and right thumb and the triggers. Okay, so before we put the last two inputs to be controlled by the Xbox controller, I finished modeling the arm with the last two servos, and I realized actually that I had the arm screwed in the wrong way, so my final twist servo was aligned in the wrong way. So now I have my model which allows me to twist, oops, let me run it, twist the arm to point in various directions. So what I'm going to do now, I have this set up with all of the rotation correct. And I am going to set up the last two inputs according to my notes, so that I can control everything with the servo controller. So the last two are the shoulder servo and the twist servo, which is this one on the bottom. And I wanted to set up the those up on the D-pad. So I think that I have projects input. I think that I've set up the D-pad X and Y. So I can go into my input controller. Let's set the array size to 6 so that I have enough room for the other two servos. D-pad X and D-pad Y, which are the two input names that I've set up already in the project's input mapping table. And I just want to say, okay, twist is the X, and shoulder is the Y. Now let's run it and see how it goes. Okay, so here's the Xbox controller. I have the triggers for the claw. I can, let's see, rotate the claw using the joystick pad. I can rotate the end using the Y axis of the joystick pad, and this is the elbow I can do with the left joystick pad, and now I can rotate using the rotate and change the final angle of the shoulder using the D-pad.